What if I told you that some of the most wicked people in history claim to have seen the horrors of hell and lived to tell the tale? From murderers to tyrants, these individuals experience terrifying glimpses of the afterlife. Join us as we uncover 10 evil people who went to hell and returned. The butcher who saw demons. Richard Kuklinski. Known as the Iceman, Richard Kuklinski was one of the most feared hitmen in history, responsible for over 200 murders. A ruthless contract killer for the mafia, he showed no remorse, freezing his victims' bodies to confuse the time of death. But what many don't know is that Kuklinski once claimed to have seen hell itself, and it changed him forever. In 1986, after his arrest, Kuklinski revealed chilling details of a near-death experience. While being poisoned by a fellow mobster, he collapsed, his body shutting down. He recalled drifting into darkness, surrounded by horrific screams and shadowy figures clawing at him. He saw faces of his victims, their mouths open in silent agony. A deep, menacing voice whispered, "You belong to us now." Terrified, Kuklinski struggled to move, but an invisible force pulled him deeper. Just as he was about to be consumed by the abyss, he awoke in a hospital bed. His heart had stopped for several minutes, but doctors managed to revive him. After this event, Kuklinski became more paranoid, convinced that demons followed him. He later told a priest, "I've been to hell. I know where I'm going." Even in 2006, when he died in prison, his final words chilled the guards. "They're waiting for me." The dictator's nightmare. Adolf Hitler's hellish vision. April 30, 1945. Berlin was crumbling under Soviet forces. Deep inside the Führer bunker, Adolf Hitler, the man responsible for the deaths of millions, put a gun to his head. The world believed he ended his life that day. But what if he didn't simply die? What if, for a brief moment, he witnessed something far worse, hell itself? As the bullet tore through his skull, Hitler found himself in an abyss darker than any battlefield. He stood before a colossal burning throne, surrounded by the agonized screams of those he sent to death camps, war zones, and gas chambers. The twisted faces of his victims reached out from rivers of molten fire, their eyes burning with a hatred beyond human comprehension. A shadowy figure, more monstrous than any dictator who ever lived, emerged from the flames. "Your reign was nothing compared to mine," it whispered. Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, and Nero stood behind him, waiting like vultures. Hitler, once feared, was now prey. As demons dragged him toward a pit of endless suffering, Hitler screamed for mercy. But in hell, mercy is a foreign concept. Just before the fire consumed him, he jolted awake, still in his bunker, drenched in sweat. Was it a hallucination? Or a glimpse of what awaited him? Terrified, he took the gun and pulled the trigger again, this time with no return. A serial killer's burning fate. Jeffrey Dahmer's dark return. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was one of the most infamous serial killers in history. Between 1978 and 1991, he brutally murdered 17 young men, committing horrific acts of torture, necrophilia, and cannibalism. His reign of terror ended when he was arrested on July 22, 1991, after a victim managed to escape and alert the police. Dahmer was sentenced to 16 life terms in prison in 1992, ensuring he would never see freedom again. While incarcerated at Columbia Correctional Institution, Dahmer reportedly experienced terrifying visions. He confided in a priest and some fellow inmates that he had nightmares of being dragged to hell by shadowy figures. He described the dark abyss filled with the screams of his victims, where he was endlessly tortured by faceless demons. In one disturbing account, Dahmer claimed he felt his flesh burning, only to wake up drenched in sweat, gasping for air. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was brutally beaten to death by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver. Many believe that in his final moments, he truly saw what awaited him in the afterlife. Some prison guards later whispered that his cell remained unnaturally cold for days, and eerie noises were heard at night. Did Dahmer really glimpse hell before his death? Or was it guilt manifesting in his darkest nightmares? Either way, his chilling tale serves as a warning. Some evils can never escape justice. The cannibal's terrifying encounter. Sagawa. In 1981, Sagawa, a 32-year-old Japanese man, committed one of the most disturbing crimes in modern history. While studying in Paris, France, he lured René Hardeveldt, a Dutch student, to his apartment under the pretense of working on poetry. What followed was an unspeakable act. He murdered her and consumed parts of her body. After being arrested, Sagawa was declared legally insane and sent to a mental institution in France. However, due to legal loopholes, he was deported to Japan in 1986 and shockingly released. He soon became a media sensation, writing books and even appearing on television. But his life took a dark turn when he allegedly had a near-death experience that changed everything. In 2013, Sagawa suffered a serious stroke, leaving him partially paralyzed. During this time, he claimed to have experienced something terrifying, a trip to hell. According to his chilling account, he found himself in a burning pit filled with agonizing screams. Shadowy figures tormented him, whispering the names of his victims. He saw Renee standing before him, her eyes hollow, her skin charred, as she condemned him to suffer forever. Suddenly, he woke up in a hospital, drenched in sweat. He later admitted that, for the first time, he felt true remorse. But was it just a dream, or a glimpse of the punishment awaiting him? The woman who danced with the devil, Elizabeth Bathory's hellish return. In the 16th century, Elizabeth Bathory, a noblewoman from Hungary, became infamous for her ruthless murders. Obsessed with youth, she believed that bathing in the blood of virgins would keep her young forever. Over 650 girls vanished in her castle, their blood spilled in her twisted rituals. In 1610, she was arrested and bricked inside her castle, left to rot in isolation. But what happened before she died sent shivers through her guards. 3 days before her death in 1614, Bathory screamed through the walls, claiming she was burning in fire. She described a shadowy figure, a horned demon, dragging her into a pit of endless suffering. She begged for mercy, clawing at the walls as if trying to escape an invisible force. Then, on August 21, 1614, she was found dead, her face twisted in pure terror. However, some say that a year later, a villager spotted a pale woman wandering near her castle, whispering in an unknown language. They believed it was Bathory's soul, cursed to return from hell, forever seeking her lost youth. Was it a hallucination, or had she truly been to hell and back? The chilling legend of Elizabeth Bathory still haunts history to this day. The drug lord's infernal trip, Pablo Escobar's final warning. In 1993, Pablo Escobar, the infamous Colombian drug lord, was at the peak of his empire. With billions in wealth, power over governments, and a ruthless reputation, he believed himself untouchable. But one terrifying experience would shake him to his core. One night in 1991, hiding in one of his secret mansions, Escobar was restless. He had just ordered the execution of 15 rivals, and his paranoia was growing. As he drifted into a disturbed sleep, he found himself in a dark, endless void. Suddenly, flames erupted around him, and horrifying screams filled the air. The air smelled of burning flesh, and demonic figures with hollow eyes surrounded him. A deep, thunderous voice echoed, "Your kingdom ends in fire." Escobar saw twisted, tormented souls reaching out, faces he recognized. His former allies, enemies, and innocent victims all burned in agony. A monstrous figure pointed at him, laughing, "You will join them soon." Escobar awoke gasping for air, drenched in sweat. Terrified, he summoned his closest men and confessed, "I saw hell, hermano. It's real." For weeks, he tried to atone, donating money, praying, even considering surrender, but his crimes were too vast. On December 2, 1993, Escobar was shot dead on a Medellin rooftop. Some claimed his last words were, "Hell is waiting." The cult leader's fiery judgment, Charles Manson. In 1969, the world was shaken by the brutal crimes of Charles Manson and his cult, the Manson family. Under his twisted influence, his followers carried out the infamous Tate LaBianca murders, leaving 7 people dead, including actress Sharon Tate. His name became synonymous with evil, and in 1971, he was sentenced to life in prison. But what if Manson's punishment went beyond prison? In 1994, inmates reported something chilling. Manson suffered a near-fatal attack by another prisoner. For 2 minutes, he lay lifeless. When he regained consciousness, he was screaming. Guards and inmates alike heard him cry, the fire won't stop." Later, Manson described his experience to a fellow inmate. He claimed he had fallen into a pit of endless flames, surrounded by tormented souls. "I saw faces melting, bones breaking," he muttered. A shadowy figure loomed over him, whispering, "Your time isn't up yet." Then he woke up, back in his cell. Until his death in 2017, Manson remained a twisted enigma. But some believe his brief visit to hell was a warning, one he refused to heed. The war criminal's cursed afterlife. Joseph Mengele. In 1945, as World War II ended, Joseph Mengele, the notorious Nazi doctor of Auschwitz, fled justice. Known as the Angel of Death, Mengele conducted horrific experiments on prisoners, showing no remorse. After escaping to South America, he lived in hiding for 34 years. One night in 1979, Mengele, then 67 years old, suffered a massive stroke while swimming in Brazil. As his body sank beneath the waves, something unnatural happened. His spirit was pulled into complete darkness. Mengele claimed to have awakened in a horrifying place. The air reeked of burning flesh, and distant screams echoed. He saw countless deformed souls, victims of his own experiments, staring at him with hollow, accusing eyes. A monstrous figure, with charred skin and hollow sockets, dragged him toward an abyss. "You belong to us," a deep, unearthly voice thundered. Mengele begged for mercy, but fiery chains wrapped around him. Just as he was about to be cast into eternal suffering, a blinding flash pulled him back. Gasping for breath, he woke up on the shore, alive. Days later, he whispered to a friend, "I saw them. They were waiting for me." But fate wasn't done. Weeks later, he drowned for real. Did hell let him go, only to claim him later? The gangster who witnessed the abyss, Al Capone's paranormal confession. During his final years at Alcatraz, 1934 to 1939, Al Capone, once the most feared gangster in Chicago, became a shadow of his former self. Suffering from syphilis-induced dementia, he often raved about a fiery abyss, claiming he had visited hell itself. One night in 1938, Capone screamed so loudly that guards rushed to the cell. He was sweating, eyes wide with terror. He spoke of being dragged into a pit of flames where he saw his victims, screaming his name, cursing him for eternity. He described a river of blood, where gangsters like Frankie Yale and Dino Banyan rotted, waiting for him. As his health declined, Capone begged priests for forgiveness, but the visions never left. By January 25, 1947, he died whispering, "They're coming for me." Did Capone truly glimpse the hell that awaited him, or was it guilt consuming his soul before death? The most feared man in hell, Jack the Ripper's return from the pit. In 1888, Jack the Ripper terrorized Whitechapel, London, brutally murdering at least 5 women. His identity remained a mystery, but legend tells of something far more chilling, his return from hell itself. Decades later, in 1935, a dying man in an asylum whispered a horrifying confession. He claimed to be the Ripper and spoke of a night when he was dragged into hell. He described demonic figures tormenting him, showing him the endless suffering of his victims. He screamed that the devil himself marked him as the most feared man in hell. Doctors dismissed his words as delirium, but strange events followed. His body vanished from the morgue, and a bloody message appeared on the walls: "I have returned." Some believe the Ripper never truly left. Others fear his soul still walks between worlds, waiting to strike again.